Many games from the 8-bit generation were one-trick ponies with gameplay focused around one specific genre, like platforming, beat-em-ups, turn-based RPGs, top-down action-adventure games, running guns, and so on. It was really rare to see a game rely on several genres as the core gameplay interface, and none that I know of did it better than SpellCaster for the Sega Master System. SpellCaster was released in 1989 and is incredibly unique as far as 8-bit RPGs go. Unlike your standard turn-based fare, SpellCaster is a delightful blend of action, adventure, and top-notch storytelling all rolled into one great game. You play as Kane, a spellcaster who's set adrift on a journey throughout old Japan to thwart an evil army that's harming his people. The story can feel convoluted at times, but it's actually really gripping. It's one of the pivotal components that sets this game apart from others of its time. In my first playthrough, it felt like a good book that I didn't want to put down because I needed to find out what was going to happen next, and that's not something that happens often to me when playing these old games. The biggest allure of SpellCaster is not just the story itself, but the way that it's told through both action sequences as well as story-based segments. The character portraits are expressive and detailed, and emotion is conveyed well without the need for voice acting and other fancy modern-day additions. The portrayal of the story through an interactive point-and-click medium was an excellent choice and makes the game feel more immersive, rather than feeling like you're a third party listening in on character conversations in traditional cutscenes. In these exchanges, menu options allow you to talk to characters about specific topics, show them items you found, and even cast a variety of spells you know. Each choice can potentially broaden topics of conversation and reveal new information or solve a puzzle. I liked showing everyone my sword as often as possible, even though it rarely did much outside of battles. Even though much of the story unfolds through conversation with other characters, the translation from the earlier Japanese release is mediocre at best. The text is sometimes a mishmash of spelling errors, like in this example where they got the word pyramid right and wrong on the same screen. Other times, some sentences can even trail off entirely, leaving you to fill in the blanks. One of the funnier aspects of the bad translation is the different insults directed at Kane throughout the story. Kane gets called everything under the sun by these powerful leaders and warriors, and at sometimes it can come across as a little hokey. One thing that I really liked was that the game's protagonist had articulated thoughts and feelings, unlike many other 8-bit RPGs where people talk at you rather than with you. The silent protagonist seems to be a staple in games like The Legend of Zelda, and even early Final Fantasy games to name a few, and SpellCaster's departure from that was very refreshing for me. Kane's replies and questions develop his character and his motivations for his adventure, and we get to see him grow and change throughout the story. The narration around each encounter added some depth, and was sometimes even hilarious. One of my very favorite parts of the game is when Kane visits what can only be called a bunch of hippies that are drinking nectar and having a party. Kane gets invited to dance and, well, he really doesn't like it. Kane feels trapped and begins to dance reluctantly is probably the funniest line in the entire game and had me laughing out loud. You have this loyal, disciplined fighter who gets peer pressured into dancing with a bunch of strangers, and it seems to end as quickly as it began. I don't think I've ever related to a video game character more than I did in that exact moment. Despite some weird issues with the translation at times, much of the story is enhanced by the environments and the ambience that the music provides. The music fits the circumstances around Kane and does a lot to establish mood. The music and visual artists that worked on this game managed to establish a variety of atmospheres ranging from bright and cheerful to glooming and even foreboding at times. There are some genuinely creepy moments in the game, and one that stood out to me was when you first meet Midori. She's standing with her back to you at the end of a dock on a pier, and the entire scene feels chilling before any words are even exchanged between the two of you. Many of the people you meet and enemies you fight are usually some manifestation of an evil spirit, so a lot of the imagery can feel a little unnerving. There are even moments when people take on monstrous forms, or possessed individuals do unexpected things like cry bloody tears out of nowhere. The little twists and turns keep you on your toes and were really well done. The backdrops for action and story sequences are bright and colorful, and objects are easy to distinguish when investigating specific areas and items. You can tell that the artists took a lot of time to make things obvious, but there are a few times where you'll get stuck trying to solve a puzzle because you didn't click on an item perfectly or interact with it in the correct way. Many items aren't able to be interacted with until you've looked at the whole environment first, so at times the game can seem a bit counterintuitive. It can start to feel frustrating if you think you've already tried something and it didn't work, but you were only a couple of pixels off or used the wrong command. Thankfully, puzzles are normally only restricted to a few screens in one area, so after a little bit of trying everything with everything else, you're bound to figure stuff out if you're really stuck. Even puzzles that involve an enemy encounter aren't too difficult. The game will literally scold you for not thinking about the problem in the way it wants you to, so it's never going to leave you hanging for too long. The action sequences are well executed overall and come up when Kane is traveling between locations, which are usually shrines, or when a boss fight pops up. Kane is easy to control and jumping and shooting feels pretty fluid. Kane's main attack is a magic ball derived from his Kai Force, which he developed as part of his training as a spellcaster. At first, most enemies take multiple hits to kill, and they respawn if you backtrack, like in Ninja Gaiden for example. Knockback can sometimes be an issue as well, but there's only a few platforming parts where this can become a serious problem for you. The ground can randomly fall away, and this actually comes up more often than the knockback, believe it or not. Going up and down stairs is oddly one of the most difficult things in the action sequences, because if anything touches you while you're on the stairs, you fall off of them. Respawning flying enemies near stairs quickly became the bane of my existence because when you get knocked off the stairs, you have to move to get back onto the bottom step, which respawns those enemies all over again. It really takes some trial and error, and really a little luck to make it up a stairwell. It really takes more work than it probably should. Getting pummeled by tons of enemies is never too problematic since in every area of the game, there's a healer character that you can go see if you need to. My favorite of these is Kuma, and he's the jolliest lover of spaghetti I've ever met in a game, besides from Papyrus from Undertale. Kuma will give you unlimited spaghetti until you're literally ready to burst, and it's a really welcome gift given the fact that everything is out there to kill you. Other healing characters also feed you, like Midori and her grandfather that dish out more traditional Japanese cuisine. One of the hippies also provides you with free nectar, which I'm pretty sure isn't nectar at all, and is probably really just booze based on the demeanor of everybody at that party. You can visit these people as often as you like, and they can keep you updated on gossip as well. In addition to his Kai Force, Kane has several spells at his disposal. Casting a spell in an action sequence requires using the pause button on the console itself, so make sure that you keep your console handy. Each spell costs some of Kane's energy, which is equivalent to magic points in other games. Energy can be built up over time by collecting orange balls that drop from every 10th enemy that you kill, but 50% of the time, blue balls will drop instead that replenish Kane's health, called strength in the game. Though it doesn't seem necessary to grind for energy, do it. Getting to the end of the game with too little energy can make the game practically unbeatable unless you build up some serious practice in the final section. You can grind energy up to 999, and that will be plenty to see you through. One spell that some people have said breaks the game is called Mikiri, which grants Kane the ability to fly for a limited time. Though it's helpful for bypassing hordes of enemies on the ground, Mikiri's cancelled if Kane is hit by an enemy or their projectiles. This is especially frustrating on the way to Mount Hinakami, where there's so much stuff happening on screen that it's difficult not to plummet to your death into the lava below. This section alone took me at least an hour of failed attempts before I went grinding for more energy so that I could cast Mikiri several times on the track. Mars is a healing spell and was probably the most useful, with Kane, a spell that's used to send spirits back to the underworld, also getting a fair bit of use. Outside of puzzle situations, I rarely used elemental spells like Fudo, Indra, or Hatten, but I'm sure they'd be effective against a variety of enemies if used in boss battles or action sequences. One of the most important spells is called Password, and that gives you a classic password with upper and lowercase letters mixed with numbers and other symbols. You can't get a password during an action sequence, but it's really important to cast it as often as possible. There are offensive and defensive upgrades for Kane that can be found throughout the game in the form of additional weapons and armor. These are extremely easy to miss in a first playthrough, and because there are several points of no return throughout the game, they can actually be permanently missed. With some thorough exploration, and I mean thorough, like literally checking underneath every single breakable brick in the pyramid maze, you'll be fine. No matter which upgrades you find, unfortunately Kane's sprite always stays the same. In other action RPGs, like Faxanadu for the NES, which is one of my very favorite games, I always looked forward to seeing how the character's appearance would change with new weapons and armor, but it was really sorely missed here. Boss battles in SpellCaster are one of my favorite parts about the game. The fights are frequent and range from easy to some real nail-biters, but the visuals in these parts are excellent. Every boss encounter is different. Some will use projectiles, some will float around the screen erratically, and many of them have different states of vulnerability where they can or can't be harmed, which usually involve the opening or closing of some bodily orifice. I think my favorite boss in the game was the reincarnation of Seaman. After too many of his sarcastic remarks and probing questions from my playthrough of the Seaman game on the Dreamcast, it was nice to finally obliterate him. I'm just kidding, I actually really love Seaman. As a word of caution though, I learned the hard way that one of the boss fights can get broken. You fight Medusa like you do in practically every video game ever in the entire history of time, but in this game her head flies off at you, for fun I guess. If you use Mikiri during the fight, her head can potentially fly off screen and will never come back, making the fight unbeatable since her body's invulnerable to attack. In general, the boss battles in SpellCaster can take some time to learn, and if you die, you get put right back into the battle after getting a berating lecture from Daikak, your mentor. Your strength gets replenished, but your energy doesn't. Getting thrown back into the throes of battle can be both a blessing and a curse, because if you need energy for a certain spell to beat the boss, but you ran out before you died, you're out of luck unless you load the game from a previous save point. This can be especially frustrating when you take the trip to the endgame boss. You can't go back once you enter that section, and good lord will you ever need a lot of energy to make it through. I don't want to say too much about the final sequence of the game because it was one of my favorite surprises, but I did do a let's play of the game if you're interested in seeing it. SpellCaster is a wonderful 8-bit game that combines several game genres with a compelling narrative to tie it all together into one nice package. It has one of the most well-developed protagonists I've seen in a game from this era, and it was truly an immersive adventure from start to finish, even if the story did take a weird turn once in a while. SpellCaster even got a sequel called Mystic Defender on the Sega Genesis, so I'll be interested to see where that game picks up the story, if it does at all. Like many of the games I've played through over the years, I'd recommend trying out SpellCaster. Though it has some tricky platforming and a horrible maze to maneuver through at one point, what old RPG doesn't? The story and characters made this game a memorable experience for me. If you do pick it up, I hope you love it as much as I did. It really does stand apart from other games of its generation.